December 1945, Tokyo. The War Crimes Tribunal chamber sat heavy with cigarette smoke and the weight of judgment. Outside, a cold rain pelted the windows of what had once been the Imperial Japanese Army headquarters. Inside, American prosecutors prepared to call their next witness. Lieutenant Akiko Yamamoto stood when they spoke her name. 30 years old, impossibly thin, wearing a faded prison uniform that hung from her shoulders like a burial shroud. Her hands were cuffed. Her face showed nothing. She walked to the witness stand with the mechanical precision of someone who had already accepted death. The lead prosecutor, a Marine colonel from Kansas City, opened a manila folder thick with photographs. He selected one and held it up for the tribunal to see. Even from across the room, the image was clear enough. Emaciated women in torn clothing, hollow eyes staring at the camera. The unmistakable marks of systematic starvation. Lieutenant Yamamoto, the prosecutor began, his voice hard as winterstone. These are American military nurses, Army personnel, protected under the Geneva Convention. You were their captor for 16 months, their torturer, their jailer. Akiko said nothing. Her eyes remained fixed on a point somewhere beyond the tribunal judges, beyond the walls, beyond everything. 47 American women entered your facility in May 1942, the prosecutor continued. Only 45 walked out alive in September 1943. 2 died under your watch. Dysentery, malnutrition, beatings, some from what your own reports called enhanced interrogation procedures. Still, Akiko remained silent. The evidence is overwhelming. Your signature appears on detention orders, interrogation schedules, punishment authorizations. You ran that camp with the efficiency of a slaughterhouse. You showed no mercy. The prosecutor paused, letting the words settle into the heavy air. The tribunal is prepared to recommend the maximum penalty, death by hanging. Do you have anything to say before we proceed? For the first time, Akiko moved. She turned her head slowly, looking at the prosecutor directly. When she spoke, her English was perfect, with just the faintest trace of a California accent from her university days. I deserve death, she said quietly. Everything you have said is true. I participated in terrible things, unforgivable things. The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. He began gathering his papers. But, Akiko continued, and something in her voice made everyone in the room stop. Before you sentence me, I must tell you what you do not know, what your government classified, what my government tried to destroy. I must tell you about the women who changed everything. The prosecutor frowned. Lieutenant Yamamoto, we have your complete service record. No, Akiko said, and now there was something new in her voice. Not defiance, something softer, something that sounded almost like grief. You have reports, documents, files, but you do not have the truth. You do not know what those women did to me, how they won a war you never knew was being fought. The chief judge, a stern-faced army general who had seen Normandy and the Bulge, leaned forward. Explain yourself, Lieutenant. Akiko took a breath. I came to that camp believing Americans were weak, corrupt, that American women in military service were the worst kind of perversion. Everything the Empire taught me said they would break easily, that their Western softness would crumble under proper pressure. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. They should have hated us, should have cursed us, should have broken. Instead, they showed me what America truly means, and that destroyed every lie I had ever believed. The tribunal chamber went absolutely silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing. I participated in evil, Akiko said, but they responded with something I had no defense against. They responded with mercy, with grace, with a kindness that made no sense. And that kindness saved my soul even as I destroyed their bodies. The prosecutor stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to gain sympathy. But the chief judge raised his hand. He had fought the Japanese for 4 years. He had seen what they did at Bataan, at Wake Island, at 100 other places where mercy was a word without meaning. And yet something in this woman's voice made him hesitate. Let her speak, he said. Akiko closed her eyes. To understand, you must go back. To May 1942. To the Philippines. To a camp that does not exist on any map. To the day 47 American women arrived, and I learned that everything I believed was a lie. The island of Luzon, May 1942. The rainy season had started early that year, turning the mountain roads into rivers of red mud. 3 military trucks struggled up the narrow track, their engines whining in low gear, their canvas tops dark with rain. Inside the lead truck, 47 American women sat in silence. Captain Helen Morrison pressed her face against the gap in the canvas, trying to see where they were going. All she could make out was jungle. Dense green, suffocating jungle that seemed to press in from all sides. They had been driving for 6 hours since leaving Manila. 6 hours north into the mountains, away from the coast, away from any hope of rescue. She pulled back from the canvas and looked at the women around her. Army nurses, most of them, some barely into their 20s, fresh out of training when the war started. Others were older veterans of the peacetime army who had chosen to stay when everyone else evacuated. WWII intelligence officers. Red Cross workers, all of them wearing the same expression now. Exhaustion mixed with fear, mixed with something harder to name. Determination, maybe. Or just the stubborn refusal to break that seam bred into American bones. Helen was 28 years old. She had grown up on an Iowa farm where her father taught her that all life had value, even the life of the animals you raised for slaughter. You showed them kindness. You gave them dignity. That was what separated humans from beasts. She had carried that lesson through nursing school, through her first years in the army, through the hell of Bataan and Corregidor. She carried it still, even now, even here. The truck lurched to a stop. Male voices shouted in Japanese. The canvas flap was thrown back and rain poured in like a waterfall. Out now, move. The women climbed down into ankle-deep mud. Helen counted them as they emerged. 47, all accounted for. Thank God. She had lost count of how many times she had counted them over the past 3 weeks since their capture. It was the only control she had left, the only way to protect them. Keep counting. Keep everyone together. Keep the structure that said they were still soldiers, still a unit, still worthy of the dignity that came with military service. They stood in the rain in front of a compound that looked like it had been carved out of the jungle by force. High bamboo walls topped with barbed wire. Guard towers at each corner. A single gate made of rough-cut logs. Beyond the walls, Helen could see the peaked roofs of several buildings, all of them dark with rain. A Japanese officer emerged from the gatehouse. Female. That was unexpected. She wore a crisp uniform despite the rain boots polished to a mirror, shine hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her skin. She walked down the line of American prisoners, slowly examining each face with an expression of cold curiosity. When she reached Helen, she stopped. "You are the ranking officer," she said in perfect, unaccented English. Helen straightened despite her exhaustion. "Captain Helen Morrison, United States Army Nurse Corps, serial number N744882. The Japanese officer smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I am Lieutenant Akiko Yamamoto. I am in command of this facility. You will address me as Lieutenant or Ma'am. You will follow all orders immediately and without question. Failure to comply will result in punishment. Do you understand?" Helen held the woman's gaze. "Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war are entitled to humane treatment, and..." Akiko's hand moved faster than Helen could track. The slap cracked across her face like a gunshot. Helen's head snapped to the side. She tasted blood. "The Geneva Convention," Akiko said quietly, "was written for soldiers. You are women pretending to be soldiers. That makes you something else entirely, something that requires special handling." She turned to address all the prisoners, raising her voice to carry over the rain. "You are here because you have violated the natural order. Japanese women serve their nation through purity and motherhood. You serve through violence and masculine ambition. This is Western sickness. You will remain here until you understand a woman's true nature, or until the war ends, whichever comes first." Helen wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand. She wanted to respond, wanted to assert their rights, their status, their humanity. But the look in Akiko's eyes stopped her. It was not cruelty she saw there. It was certainty, absolute, unshakable certainty that everything she was saying was true. "Strip them," Akiko ordered the guards. "Processing begins now." The processing room was concrete and bright lights and the smell of disinfectant mixed with fear. They took everything. Uniforms, boots, undergarments, personal items. A photograph of Helen's fiancé, a lieutenant who had died at Bataan. A silver dollar one of the younger nurses carried for luck. The small leather Bible that Corporal Dorothy Williams had carried all the way from Alabama. Everything went into labeled bags cataloged with the same efficiency the Japanese brought to all their record-keeping. Helen stood naked under the harsh lights, surrounded by guards who looked at her like she was something in a medical specimen jar. Interesting, unusual, worthy of study. She forced herself to stand straight, head up, eyes forward. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her shame. Akiko walked around her, slowly making notes on a clipboard. Name, age, height, weight, previous medical history. Helen provided the information in a flat military monotone. Name, rank, serial number. She would give them nothing else, nothing that mattered. but Akiko seemed unconcerned with what Helen did or did not say. She was looking at her with that same clinical interest, like a scientist examining a new species of insect. Interesting, Akiko murmured. You maintain military bearing even now, even naked and defeated. This is the Western delusion we are here to study, the belief that a woman can have dignity outside her natural role. Helen met her eyes. Dignity comes from the soul, Lieutenant, not from clothing. You cannot take that with a pair of scissors. Akiko's expression did not change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or irritation that this prisoner would dare to speak like an equal. We shall see, she said quietly. Take her to the medical examination room. Full processing. Document everything. What happened in the medical examination room, Helen would not speak of later. Not to the Army investigators who debriefed her, not to her family when she finally made it home, not even to herself in the long nights when memory came whether she wanted it or not. Some experiences lived in the body, not in words. Some violations were too complete for language. When they finally gave her clothing again, it was a thin cotton dress, shapeless and gray. No undergarments, no shoes. The dress hung on her like a shroud. They had taken her captain's bars, her insignia, every visible marker of her rank and status. But they could not take the way she held herself, could not take the set of her shoulders or the steel in her spine. They put her in a barracks with the other nurses, 12 women in a room meant for 6, rough wooden bunks, no mattresses, a single bucket in the corner for waste, gaps in the walls where the rain came through. But they were together. That mattered. As long as they were together, they were still a unit, still soldiers. Helen waited until the guards locked them in for the night. Then she stood in the center of the room, and even though her body ached from the processing, even though her face was swollen from Akiko's slap, even though everything in her wanted to curl up in a corner and weep, she straightened to attention. Listen to me, she said quietly. I am still Captain Helen Morrison. You are still United States military personnel. They took our uniforms, but they did not take our oaths. They took our names from our records, but they did not take who we are. She looked at each face. Young Lieutenant Sarah Chen, whose Chinese-American parents had fled Shanghai before the war. Corporal Dorothy Williams, barely 21, who sang gospel songs when she was nervous. Tall, quiet Sergeant Mary O'Brien, who had delivered more babies in Army hospitals than she could count. 12 women, 12 soldiers. We will maintain military discipline, Helen continued. We will share everything equally. We will support each other. We will survive together. That is not a request, that is an order. Is that understood? Around the room, voices answered in the darkness. Yes, ma'am. Understood, Captain. We're with you. Helen nodded, even though they probably could not see her in the dim light filtering through the gaps in the walls. Good, now get some rest. Tomorrow we start fighting a different kind of war. She lay down on the hard wooden bunk and closed her eyes. Outside, she could hear the guards talking in Japanese, the rain drumming on the roof, the jungle sounds that never quite stopped even at night. And underneath it all, so faint, she might have imagined it, the sound of someone crying in one of the other barracks. She had no way of knowing that the woman who would save them all was the same woman who had slapped her in the rain and called her an abomination. Akiko Yamamoto sat in her private quarters writing in the leather-bound journal she kept locked in her desk. The journal was forbidden. Personal diaries were considered a security risk, but she had kept one since her university days in California, and she could not break the habit even now. Today's entry was brief. 47 prisoners arrived, processing complete. Initial assessment subjects display surprising psychological resilience. Expected displays of weakness, crying collapse. Instead observed maintained military bearing and mutual support structure. This contradicts training regarding Western female psychology. Further observation required. She paused, pen hovering over the paper, then added one more line. Subject Morrison Helen, Captain, age 28, primary observation target, maintains eye contact, shows no fear, displays unusual composure for prisoner in her situation. Must determine if this is training or genuine psychological attribute. If latter, must understand source. Akiko closed the journal and locked it away. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The jungle sounds rose to fill the silence. Insects and birds and things that moved through the darkness without names. She had studied at UCLA before the war, back when relations between America and Japan were merely tense, not yet broken. She had walked the campus in Westwood, attended lectures on Western literature and philosophy, even dated an American boy for a few months before her father ordered her home. She thought she understood Americans, thought she had seen through their facade of equality and freedom to the rot underneath. But something about Morrison bothered her. The way the woman had stood naked under the lights and still managed to look dignified. The way she had organized her nurses even in defeat. The way she had met Akiko's eyes, without hatred, without fear, with something that looked almost like pity. Akiko had been trained to break prisoners, had studied the latest psychological techniques developed by the Captivity, had read all the research on Western female psychology, which unanimously agreed that women without proper male authority would collapse under pressure. Morrison should be broken already, should be crying in her cell begging for mercy, willing to say anything to make the pain stop. Instead, she had given orders to her subordinates, had maintained military discipline, had shown leadership. It made no sense. Tomorrow she told herself she would begin the process of breaking these American women, and she would start by proving that Morrison's dignity was nothing but a facade, an act that would crumble like everything else Western when subjected to proper pressure. She was certain of it, absolutely certain. The next morning arrived gray and wet. The women were roused at dawn by guards banging on the barracks door. No breakfast, no water, just orders to assemble in the courtyard. Helen counted them as they emerged, 47 women from 6 different barracks, all wearing the same gray dresses, all barefoot in the mud, all looking to her for guidance, even though half of them outranked her in the regular world, where rank and protocol still meant something. Akiko stood on a raised platform at the front of the courtyard. Behind her, a detail of guards with rifles. The rain had started again, a light mist that soaked through the thin dresses in minutes. "You will stand at attention until I dismiss you," Akiko announced. "Any movement, any sound will result in punishment for your entire group. This is your first lesson. In this place, you are responsible for each other. One person's failure is everyone's failure. That is the collective responsibility we will teach you." Helen felt the cold rain running down her back, felt her bare feet sinking into the mud, calculated how long they could stand like this before someone collapsed. The youngest nurses were already shivering. Dorothy Williams was biting her lip, trying not to scream. Old Sergeant O'Brien, who had arthritis in both knees, was already swaying. 2 hours, Helen guessed. Maybe 3 if they were strong. After that, someone would fall. And then Akiko would have her excuse for collective punishment. Helen made a decision. She stepped forward. "Lieutenant Yamamoto," she called out, her voice cutting through the rain, "I request permission to speak." Akiko's eyes narrowed. "You were ordered to silence." "I understand. I am requesting an exception as ranking American officer to commanding officer of this facility." For a long moment, Akiko said nothing. Then with a small gesture to the guards, she indicated Helen should approach the platform. Helen walked through the mud head, high back straight. When she reached the platform, she looked up at Akiko. "What do you want, Morrison?" "A bargain," Helen said quietly. "You want to break us. I understand that. It is your job, but collective punishment is inefficient. It breaks the weak and strengthens the strong. If you want to truly study us, you need a different approach." Akiko's expression remained neutral, but Helen saw the flicker of interest in her eyes. "Explain." "Interrogate me first," Helen said. "Alone. Use whatever methods you wish. If I show the weakness you expect, then you will have proven your theory. The other women will see their leader fail and their resistance will crumble, more efficient than standing in the rain for hours. And if you do not break," Helen met her eyes, "then you will have learned something valuable about American military training. Either way, you gain useful research data. Better than watching us stand in mud until someone faints." Akiko studied her for a long moment. Behind Helen, the other prisoners stood silent in the rain waiting. The only sound was the steady patter of water on bamboo and the distant call of jungle birds. "Very well," Akiko said finally. "Take Morrison to interrogation room 1. The rest of you are dismissed. Return to your barracks." As the guards moved forward to take Helen away, she turned back to her nurses. "Remember your training," she called out. "Remember who you are." Dorothy Williams, the young corporal from Alabama, was the first to respond. Her voice was small but steady. "Yes, ma'am, we remember." Then another voice and another until all 46 remaining women were responding. "We remember, Captain. We won't forget. You are not alone." Helen smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had felt since Manila fell. Then she turned and followed the guards into the interrogation building, and the door closed behind her with a sound like the ceiling of a tomb. The interrogation room was exactly what Helen expected. Small, concrete, a single wooden chair bolted to the floor, bright lights that made her eyes water, a table with various implements laid out in neat rows. Some she recognized. Others were mysteries she had no desire to solve. Akiko entered alone, closing the door behind her. She walked to the table and ran her fingers over the instruments there, not looking at Helen. "I studied at UCLA," she said conversationally. "Before the war, did you know that I took classes in American literature, psychology, history, I thought I understood your country. I thought I knew what made Americans weak. She picked up a leather strap, tested its flexibility. Then I came home and learned the truth. That everything America claims to stand for is a lie. Freedom, equality, dignity for all. These are just words you use to cover your corruption, your decadence, your fundamental weakness. Helen said nothing. She had been taught that silence was the strongest response to interrogation. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. Save your words for when they mattered. Akiko set down the strap and turned to face her. But you, Morrison, you confuse me. You should be weak. He should be broken already. Western woman raised in comfort taught that you deserve respect and dignity just for existing. You should be crying, begging, trying to bargain for mercy. She stepped closer. Instead, you bargain for your subordinates. You volunteer to suffer in their place. You stand in the rain and smile like you have already won some victory I cannot see. Why, what makes you so certain? What gives you this strength that should not exist? Helen met her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. I am an American, she said simply. That is what gives me strength. Akiko's hand moved, another slap harder than the first. Helen's head snapped back. She tasted blood again, felt her lips split where it had just started to heal. Words, Akiko hissed. Empty words. I can make you scream those words. Make you denounce everything you claim to believe. Make you beg me to stop until you have no dignity left at all. Helen straightened slowly, looked at Akiko again, and when she spoke, there was something in her voice that made Akiko take an involuntary step backward. You can hurt my body, Lieutenant. You can starve me, torture me, kill me, but you cannot touch what makes me who I am, because that does not live in my body. It lives in something you do not understand, something your empire cannot reach. And what is that? Akiko demanded. Helen smiled through her bloody lips. Grace, mercy, the knowledge that all human beings have inherent worth, even our enemies, even you. The words hung in the air between them like something physical. Akiko stared at Helen as if she had suddenly started speaking a foreign language, as if the very concept being expressed was so alien that it could not be processed. Even me, she repeated slowly. Even you, Helen confirmed. You are doing terrible things, but you are still a human being, still worthy of dignity, still loved by him. That is what my father taught me on our farm in Iowa. That is what America taught me, and that is what you cannot take away no matter what you do to this body. For a long moment, Akiko said nothing. The silence stretched. Outside, the rain had picked up again, drumming on the roof like urgent fingers. Then Akiko turned away sharply. Guards, she called, wake the prisoner back to her barracks. Processing is complete for today. As Helen was let out, she glanced back. Akiko stood at the table staring at the instruments of torture she had not used. Her face was unreadable, but her hands, Helen noticed, were shaking. Something had happened in that room. Something neither of them fully understood yet. The first crack in the certainty that Akiko wore like armor. The first seed of doubt planted in soil that had never questioned before. It was not much, not nearly enough, but it was a beginning. And sometimes Helen thought, as the guards locked her back in the barracks, where her nurses waited with anxious faces, sometimes a beginning is all you need. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing away the blood and mud and fear. Inside, 47 American women settled in for a war that would not be won with weapons or violence. A war that would be won with something far more powerful. A war that would be won with grace. 3 weeks passed in the grace sameness of captivity. The women learned the rhythms of Kampokatsu, the way prisoners everywhere learn the patterns that govern their days. Dawn roll call in the courtyard. Watery rice soup for breakfast, barely enough to coat the stomach. Work details that seemed designed more to humiliate than to accomplish anything useful. Helen watched her nurses grow thinner, watched the light fade from young eyes, counted them every morning and every night, terrified that one day the count would come up short. But something else was happening too, something Akiko had not anticipated. The women were organizing. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the brilliant Chinese-American intelligence officer who spoke fluent Japanese, began listening. The guards did not know this. They spoke freely around Sarah, assuming the American prisoners were too stupid or too broken to understand. Sarah understood everything. She learned that supplies were running low, that Tokyo was demanding results from the research program, and Akiko was under pressure to show psychological breakdown in her subjects. She learned that one young guard, barely 18, cried at night in his bunk because the things he was ordered to do reminded him too much of his sister back home. Sarah passed this intelligence to Helen in whispers during the evening hours when the guards grew lazy and inattentive. Helen filed it all away, building a map of the camp's weaknesses in her mind. The first real test came on a Thursday morning in early June. A supply truck arrived at dawn. Sarah, assigned to kitchen duty, watched as guards unloaded crates of rice and dried fish. But she also saw something else. Tucked in the back of the truck, hidden under canvas tarps, were wooden crates marked with red crosses. Medical supplies. She found Helen during the midday break, speaking in a whisper so quiet it was barely breath. "Captain, medical supplies in the storage shed. Sulfa drugs, bandages, morphine. Enough to actually treat the sick." Helen's mind raced. 3 women were running fevers in the next barracks, infections from untreated cuts and the constant exposure to filth. Without antibiotics, those infections would spread. People would die. "Can you get to it?" Helen asked. "There is a guard rotation gap, 15 minutes every evening when the day shift changes. The storage shed lock is old. I could pick it." Helen closed her eyes, weighed the risk against the need, made the calculation that commanders have made since humans first went to war. "Do it. But Sarah, if you are caught, I ordered you. Make them understand it was my call." Sarah smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "With respect, Captain, they can go to hell. I volunteered for this war. I will volunteer for this too." That night, while the guards ate their evening meal, Chen moved through the shadows like smoke. The lock was old, rusted, simple. It gave way to a piece of wire from her dress hem in under a minute. Inside the shed, she worked by feel in the darkness, found the medical crates by touch, took only what could be hidden, what might not be missed immediately. Sulfa tablets in a small bottle, a roll of clean bandages, 3 morphine ampules. She was halfway back to the barracks when a voice spoke from the darkness. "Stop." Sarah froze, turned slowly. Akiko stood 10 feet away, barely visible in the shadows between buildings. She held no weapon, made no move to call the guards, just stood there watching. "Lieutenant Yamamoto," Sarah said quietly. She did not try to hide what she carried. No point. The evidence was clear. Akiko stepped closer, looked at the medicine in Sarah's hands, looked at Sarah's face. When she spoke, her voice was strange, almost curious. "You know the punishment for theft?" "Yes, ma'am." "You know I could have you executed before sunrise?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then why?" Sarah met her eyes. 3 women are dying of infection in barracks 4. Without treatment, they will be dead in a week. With this medicine, they will live. That is why. Akiko was silent for a long moment. In the distance, a guard laughed at some joke. Closer, the jungle insects sang their endless song. "You are willing to die for them, for women you barely know." "They are my sisters in arms, ma'am." "Yes, I would die for them." Something shifted in Akiko's expression, the same confusion that had flickered across her face in the interrogation room when Helen spoke of grace and mercy. "Go," Akiko said finally. "Deliver the medicine, but Lieutenant Chen, if I see evidence of theft again, I will not be able to ignore it. Do you understand?" Sarah understood that Akiko was giving her a warning, was choosing for reasons Sarah could not fathom to look the other way. "I understand, ma'am. Thank you." "Do not thank me," Akiko said sharply. "I am not your friend. I am your captor. This changes nothing." But they both knew it's changed everything. The medicine saved 3 lives. Word of the healing spread through the camp in whispers. Not the theft itself, but the miracle of it. The impossible grace of medicine appearing when it was needed most. The guards noticed the recovery, reported it to Akiko. She wrote in her official log that the prisoners had responded well to improved sanitation measures, made no mention of stolen supplies. But at night in her private quarters, she wrote different words in her forbidden journal. Lieutenant Chen risked execution to save others, showed no fear when confronted, stated she would die for women she barely knows. This contradicts all research on Western individualism and self-preservation. Cannot reconcile observed behavior with training materials. Morrison was right. There is something here I do not understand. June became July. The rainy season intensified. The women adapted. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic between captors and captives began to shift. A guard who left a cup of tea near where the prisoners were working as if by accident. The young guards Sarah had heard crying at night began bringing scraps of food from the officers' mess, leaving them where the prisoners would find them, never making eye contact. Akiko noticed and said nothing. She was supposed to discipline such softness, but she found herself unable to give the order because she was watching how the Americans treated each other, watching how they shared the tiny scraps of extra food equally, watching how they maintained structure and dignity in conditions designed to strip both away. She watched Helen Morrison most of all. Helen, who stood every morning at roll call with her back straight and her head high even as her body grew thinner and weaker. Helen, who insisted on being last in the food line so she could be sure everyone else ate first. Helen, who sat with the dying women in the night hours holding their hands and singing Iowa farm songs in a voice hoarse from malnutrition and thirst. One evening in late July, Akiko found herself standing outside the barracks where Helen slept, listening to the sounds from within. The women were singing, some hymn Akiko did not recognize, with words about amazing grace and how sweet the sound. Their voices were thin and weak, but they sang anyway. Akiko's hand was on the door, ready to burst in and silence them. But she could not make herself open the door, could not make herself stop the singing, because the song was beautiful, because the women inside were doing something her training said was impossible. They were finding joy in hell, finding grace in a place designed to destroy grace. She lowered her hand, walked away, let them sing. That night she wrote in her journal until her hand cramped. They sang tonight about grace, about being lost and found, about seeing when once they were blind. I ordered silence, but I could not enforce it. I stood outside their door and listened instead. Why can I not simply do my duty? What are they seeing that I am blind to? She stopped writing, stared at the last sentence she had penned. What am I blind to, she wondered. What truth am I missing? But she had no answer. Not yet. August arrived with crushing heat. 2 more women died. Dysentery, this time the constant killer in tropical prisons. Helen performed the burial rites herself, speaking words of comfort over shallow graves dug in red clay soil. The women sang Amazing Grace again. Akiko stood at a distance watching. Did not interfere. 45 remained now. 45 out of the original 47. Helen counted them every morning with a sick feeling in her stomach. Then something unexpected arrived. A supply truck brought mail. Not for the prisoners, for the guards. Letters from home care packages from families in Japan. The guards tore into them eagerly. One guard, the young one who cried at night, received a package with dried persimmons and a photograph of his family. He sat in the corner of the guardhouse holding the picture and weeping openly. Sarah, working nearby, watched this. Watched the guards pass around photographs, show off pictures of children and parents, and the lives they had left behind to fight this war. Watch them be human for a moment instead of just captors. That night, she spoke to Helen about an idea. The guards are homesick, Sarah said. Young, scared, far from everything they know, just like us. What are you suggesting? That we remind them we are human too, that we show them we are not so different. Helen considered this. How so? Yeah, Sarah smiled. Baseball. The baseball had arrived 3 weeks earlier, smuggled in by the Filipino civilian who drove the supply truck. How Sarah had convinced him to risk his life for such a thing, she would not say. But there it was, a battered leather sphere with red stitching that reminded them all of summer afternoons and normalcy and the America they might never see again. The next morning during recreation period, Sarah simply walked to the center of the yard and began throwing the ball against the barracks wall, catching it, throwing again. One by one, the other women joined her, formed a rough circle, started tossing the ball around. Their movements were stiff, their throws weak from malnutrition, but they were playing, actually playing a game in the mud and heat of a Japanese prison camp. The guards watched with confusion. One moved forward to stop them, but Akiko, who had been observing from the command building, held up a hand. Let them play, she ordered. Helen caught the ball, turned and threw it toward Dorothy Williams. Dorothy caught it, laughed despite everything, and threw it to Sergeant O'Brien. The ball moved around the circle, and with it something that had been buried under weeks of suffering began to resurface. Something that looked almost like joy. The ball rolled toward the fence, stopped at the feet of Akiko, who had walked closer without quite meaning to. Helen approached slowly, held out her hand like she was offering something precious. Would you like to try, Lieutenant? It is easy. Just throw and catch. Akiko looked down at the baseball. Such a simple thing. Leather and string and the ghost of a world where children played in fields without barbed wire. She should confiscate it, should punish them for contraband. Instead, she picked up the ball. Like this, she asked, and tossed the ball gently toward Helen. Helen caught it easily, smiled. Not the smile of a prisoner trying to curry favor. Something genuine. Something that said they were for just this moment not enemies. Just 2 women throwing a ball in the sun. Good form. Want to try a curve? The guards were staring now, shocked to see their lieutenant engaging with prisoners like equals. Akiko became aware of their watching, felt the weight of protocol and duty pressing down on her shoulders. She straightened, her face hardened. Confiscated, she said sharply. Return to your barracks. Recreation period is over. She turned and walked away, the baseball clutched in her hand. Behind her, she heard the women filing back to their quarters without protest. Heard Helen telling them it was all right, that they had done well, that small victories still counted. That night, Akiko sat in her quarters holding the baseball, turning it over in her hands, examining the stitching, trying to understand why such a simple object felt so heavy with meaning. She thought about the moment when Helen had smiled at her, not with hatred or fear, with something that looked like friendship. How could anyone believe that? How could anyone maintain such faith in human goodness when surrounded by evidence of human evil? Akiko set the baseball on her desk, stared at it like it might hold answers. She should return to proper protocol tomorrow. Reassert discipline. Remember that these were not friends but subjects of research. Enemies of the empire. But tonight she kept the baseball on her desk where she could see it. And when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of playing catch in a field somewhere far from war with people who smiled at her without fear. September brought news that changed everything. Sarah, working in the kitchen, overheard guards discussing a radio report. American forces had landed at Guadalcanal, were pushing the Japanese back across the Solomon Islands. The tide of war was turning. She passed this intelligence to Helen, who passed it to the others. Hope kindled in 45 hearts. The knowledge that America had not forgotten them. That somewhere out there, their country was fighting its way back. The women began to change, to stand taller, to push back more against the small humiliations of captivity. Not overtly, not enough to invite punishment, but in tiny ways that added up to resistance. Akiko noticed, reported to Tokyo that the prisoners were showing renewed psychological resistance, requested guidance on how to proceed. The response came a week later in a sealed envelope marked urgent. Colonel Ishida would be arriving for inspection in 2 weeks. He would evaluate the research program personally. If results were not satisfactory, new protocols would be implemented. More aggressive methods. Techniques designed to break resistance completely. Akiko read the orders 3 times. Felt cold spreading through her chest despite the tropical heat. She knew Colonel Ishida's reputation, knew what his enhanced interrogation methods looked like, knew that if he took over this camp, women would die. Not from disease or malnutrition, from systematic torture designed to destroy not just bodies, but souls. She thought about Helen Morrison, who prayed for her enemies even as they imprisoned her. Thought about Sarah Chen, who risked her life to save others. Thought about Dorothy Williams, who sang hymns that spoke of grace and redemption. She thought about the baseball sitting on her desk. The moment when Helen had smiled at her like they were friends. And Akiko Yamamoto, loyal officer of the Imperial Japanese Army, trained interrogator, believer in everything the empire stood for, made a choice that would change the course of her entire life. She burned the orders from Tokyo. Then she walked to barracks 1 where Helen Morrison slept and knocked on the door. They sat in Helen's quarters, 2 women who should have been enemies speaking in whispers, while the other prisoners pretended to sleep and listened to every word. There is an inspection coming, Akiko said without preamble. A colonel from Tokyo. If he finds the prisoners in their current state showing resistance, maintaining spirit, he will implement new protocols, harsher methods. People will die. Helen said nothing, waited. I do not understand you. Akiko continued, and there was something raw in her voice now. I was taught that Americans are weak, selfish, that women without proper authority collapse under pressure. But you do not collapse. You sing songs about grace while starving. You share food you do not have. You risk execution to save people you barely know. You smile at your captor like she is worthy of friendship. She looked at Helen directly. Why, what makes you so strong? What am I missing? Helen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. Lieutenant, you are not missing anything. You are seeing exactly what is there. You are seeing that the things you were taught are lies. Then tell me the truth. The truth is simple. Every human being has worth, not because of their nation or their gender or their obedience to authority, because they are human, because they carry a spark of the divine. That is what America taught me. That is what my father taught me. That all life has value, even the lives of our enemies. Akiko shook her head. That is weakness, sentiment. It cannot work in the real world. Is it working now? Helen asked quietly. Here in this camp, you could have let Sarah die for stealing medicine. You did not. You could have punished us for playing baseball. You did not. You could have stopped our singing. You did not. Why? Akiko had no answer, or rather she had an answer, but could not speak it aloud. Could not admit that she had been changed by these women, that their grace had cracked something in her that she had thought was unbreakable. If this colonel comes, Helen said, and implements his enhanced methods, we will endure them. We will survive or we will die. But either way, we will not hate you. We will not curse you, because that is not who we are. How can you not hate me? I have participated in your suffering. Helen reached out slowly, giving Akiko time to pull away. Touched her hand. Because hate destroys the person doing the hating more than the person being hated. Because grace is stronger than revenge. Because you are human and humans can change. You are changing already. I can see it. Akiko pulled her hand away, stood abruptly. I should not have come here. This was a mistake. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. The inspection is in 12 days. I do not know what will happen. But Captain Morrison, I want you to know something. You were right about mercy, about grace, about all of it. I do not know what to do with that knowledge, but you were right. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Helen alone with the weight of what had just been said. Dorothy Williams spoke into the darkness. Did that just happen? Did a Japanese officer just admit we were right? Yes, Helen said quietly. I think she did. What does it mean? Helen did not know, could not see the future, but she felt something she had not felt in months. Something dangerous and precious and fragile as spider silk. She felt hope. Colonel Ishida arrived on a Tuesday morning when the heat lay over Camp Okatsu like a wet blanket. His staff car came up the mountain road trailing dust. Akiko stood at the gate, her uniform pressed despite the humidity, her face carefully blank. She had not slept in 3 days. Ishida emerged from the morrow like a predator uncoiling. Tall for a Japanese man with iron gray hair and eyes that registered everything and revealed nothing. He had commanded interrogation facilities in Manchuria before the war, places where screaming was so common it became background noise. Lieutenant Yamamoto, he said, returning her salute with mechanical precision. Show me your facility. Show me what 8 months of research has produced. They walked the compound in silence. Ishida examined everything with the thoroughness of a surgeon planning an incision. His face showed nothing, but Akiko could feel his disapproval radiating like heat from a stove. Finally, he ordered the prisoners assembled in the courtyard. 45 women stood in a rough formation in the mud. They were thin, all of them, bones showing through skin turned sallow from poor nutrition. But they stood straight, maintained military bearing, met Ishida's gaze without flinching. He walked down the line, slowly examining each face. When he reached Helen Morrison, he stopped. You are the ranking officer, he stated. Captain Helen Morrison, United States Army Nurse Corps, serial number NN744882. Ishida smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. You know, Captain, I have broken women stronger than you. Women who thought their ideology made them immune to pain. They all begged eventually. All of them. There is a point where the body simply overrides the mind. Would you like to discover where that point is for you? Helen met his eyes steadily. Do what you need to do, Colonel. I will give you nothing but name, rank, and serial number. We shall see. Ishida turned to Akiko. Lieutenant, your reports indicate minimal psychological degradation in your subjects. After 8 months, these women should be compliant. Broken. Instead, they maintain military structure and defiant bearing. This suggests failure of methodology. Sir, the research protocols prescribe gradual psychological pressure designed to. I can read protocols, Lieutenant. What I cannot understand is why you have failed to implement them properly. These women are healthier than they should be. Their morale is higher than it should be. Someone has been showing unauthorized mercy. The words hung in the humid air like an accusation. Sir, I have followed all authorized procedures. Then we will implement unauthorized ones. Effective immediately, I am assuming direct command of this facility. You will assist me in demonstrating proper interrogation techniques, starting with their leader. He gestured to the guards. Bring Morrison to interrogation room 1. The rest of you remain at attention. You will stand here until I dismiss you. Any movement will result in severe punishment for Morrison. As the guards moved forward to seize Helen, she turned to look at her nurses. Remember who you are, she said quietly. Remember your oaths. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you stay strong. That is an order. Then she was dragged away, and the door to the interrogation building closed behind her with the finality of a coffin lid. Akiko stood in the corner of the interrogation room, ordered to observe and learn. Ishida worked with the methodical efficiency of long practice. He did not rage or threaten. He simply hurt Helen Morrison with clinical precision. Why did you join the military? Helen said nothing, gave him only her name, rank, serial number. More pain, carefully calibrated, designed to damage without killing. What made you think a woman could be a soldier? Name, rank, serial number. Helen's voice growing weaker but not breaking. Akiko watched and felt something inside her crumbling, felt the last foundations of her certainty turning to dust, because she could see now with terrible clarity the difference between what she had done and what Ishida was doing. She had been cruel, yes, had participated in suffering, but she had told herself it was research. This was not research. This was torture for its own sake. This was the deliberate destruction of a human being because her existence challenged the order Ishida believed the world should have. Helen lasted 6 hours before her body gave out. Not her will. Her body simply stopped being able to remain conscious. She slumped in the chair, breathing but unresponsive. Ishida stepped back, disappointed. Weak constitution. We will resume tomorrow when she has recovered. Lieutenant Yamamoto, have the camp doctor ensure she survives the night. I am not finished with her. He lit a cigarette, blew smoke toward the ceiling. Tomorrow we will try something different. We will bring in the young one, the one who sings, Williams, I believe. We will herd her while Morrison watches. Let us see how American compassion holds up when it makes the suffering worse. Something in Akiko snapped. No. Ishida turned slowly. What did you say, Lieutenant? I said, no, sir. I will not participate in this. You do not have a choice. You are an officer of the Imperial Japanese Army. You follow orders. Akiko straightened to attention. I am also a human being, sir, and what you are doing here is not interrogation. It is not research. It is simply cruelty, and I will not be part of it anymore. Ishida's eyes went flat and cold. You are relieved of duty, Lieutenant, confined to quarters pending court-martial for insubordination. Guards escort her out. And Lieutenant, when I am finished with these prisoners, you will learn what real interrogation looks like. You have been corrupted by extended contact with Western thinking. We will correct that. As the guards led her away, Akiko looked back at Helen Morrison's unconscious form, looked at the woman who had prayed for her enemies, who had smiled at her captor, who had shown her what grace looked like. And Akiko Yamamoto made the final choice that would define the rest of her life. She would save them. All of them, or die trying. They locked Akiko in her quarters under guard, took her sidearm, her rank insignia, everything that marked her as an officer, left her alone with her thoughts and the sound of Helen Morrison screaming in the interrogation building. The guard outside her door was young, the same one who cried at night, the one who had been sneaking food to the prisoners. Akiko called to him through the door. Private Tanaka, I need to speak with you. I have orders not to communicate with you, Lieutenant. I know, but Tanaka, you have a sister. I have seen her photograph. She looks like the American prisoners, does she not? Young, innocent, far from home. Silence from the other side of the door. If your sister was captured by Americans, what would you want them to do? Would you want them to torture her, or would you want them to show mercy? More silence. Then so quietly she almost missed it. What do you want, Lieutenant? I need you to deliver a message to the prisoner called Sarah Chen. Tell her I need to speak with her. Tonight. Tell her it is about survival, hers and everyone else's. If I am caught, I will be executed. I know. I am asking anyway. Because you are a good man, Private Tanaka. Because you still remember what honor means. The guard said nothing for a long time. Then what is the message? Sarah came at midnight, brought by Tanaka through shadows and silence. The young guard opened Akiko's door, let Sarah slip inside, then closed it again and stood watch. Sarah and Akiko stared at each other across the small room. You wanted to talk, Sarah said. Talk fast. If we are discovered, Ishida will kill us both. I want to help you escape. All of you. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Why would you help us? Because Captain Morrison was right. About everything, about mercy, about grace, about the worth of human beings regardless of nationality or ideology. I spent 8 months trying to prove her wrong. Instead, she proved me wrong. And I cannot be part of what Ishida is doing. I will not. So you want to betray your country to save your conscience? Akiko flinched. Yes, if that is how you wish to frame it. Yes. Sarah studied her for a long moment. Then what is your plan? I know these mountains. I know where the Filipino resistance operates. If I can get you to them, they can get you to American lines. But it must happen soon. Tomorrow, Ishida plans to torture Corporal Williams in front of Captain Morrison. We have perhaps 2 days before people start dying. And what happens to you after we escape? Akiko smiled, and there was something sad in it. I will be executed as a traitor. But Sarah, I am a traitor. I have betrayed everything I once believed in. The only question now is whether I betray it for good reasons or bad ones. Saving innocent lives seems like a good reason. Sarah was quiet. Finally, I need to speak with Captain Morrison before agreeing to anything. She leads us. Her decision is final. Morrison is unconscious in the medical building. She may not wake before dawn. Then we wait until she wakes. This is her call, not mine. Akiko nodded. Fair enough. But Sarah, understand this. Whether you agree to my help or not, I am done participating in your torture. I would rather die as a traitor to the Empire than live as a traitor to my own soul. Sarah looked at her with something that might have been respect. You know, Lieutenant, in another world, we might have been friends. In another world, Akiko agreed. But we live in this one, and in this world I have much to atone for. Helen woke at dawn to find Akiko sitting beside her cot in the medical building. Every part of her body screamed with pain. You should not be here, Helen whispered through cracked lips. If Ishida finds you. Ishida has confined me to quarters pending court-martial. I escaped. I have perhaps an hour before they discover I am missing. Why? To tell you I am sorry, to tell you that you were right about everything, to offer you a chance at escape. Helen tried to sit up. Akiko helped her gentle hands supporting weight that had diminished to almost nothing. I cannot accept your apology, Helen said quietly. Not because I do not forgive you, but because grace is not mine to give or withhold. It simply is. You do not need my forgiveness, Akiko. You need to forgive yourself. It was the first time Akiko had heard her given name from American lips, spoken without rank or formality, spoken like they were two women instead of captor and captive. I do not know how, Akiko admitted. By doing the next right thing, and then the next, and the next, until one day you look back and realize you have become someone new. Akiko outlined her plan then. The escape route through the mountains, the Filipino resistance contacts she had made days earlier anticipating this moment, the timing that would give them the best chance. How many guards are loyal to you? Helen asked. One for certain, Private Tanaka, perhaps 2 or 3 others who are uncomfortable with Ishida's methods. Not enough for a direct confrontation. Then we use misdirection, create a crisis that pulls guards away from the main gate, move during the confusion. What kind of crisis? Helen smiled despite the pain it caused. A fire, in the supply depot, large enough to threaten the whole camp. Guards will rush to save their food and ammunition. We move during the chaos. You would burn the supplies you need that food to survive. We need freedom more, and we are Americans. We will figure out survival after we are free. It is what we do. Akiko nodded slowly. When tonight, Ishida will start on Dorothy tomorrow morning. I will not let that happen. We go tonight. Akiko stood, hesitated, then did something she had never done in 8 months of captivity. She bowed, not the shallow bow of superior to inferior, the deep bow of respect between equals. Thank you, she said, for showing me what I could not see, for being stronger than everything I did to you, for having mercy when I deserved none. Thank you for choosing to become someone better. That is harder than enduring torture. That takes real courage. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Helen was returned to the barracks under guard. She briefed the women quietly on what was coming. Tonight at 2200 hours, there will be a fire in the supply depot. When the alarm sounds, we move. Stay together. Follow Lieutenant Chen. She knows the route. We are trusting the Japanese officer, Dorothy Williams asked. We are trusting a woman who chose mercy over duty. Yes, I trust her with our lives. Even after what she did to you. Helen looked at Dorothy, especially because of what she did to me. Because she looked at her own evil and chose to become something different. That is the hardest thing a human being can do, and we are going to help her do it. Sarah spent the afternoon memorizing every detail of Akiko's route description. Private Tanaka brought their evening rations personally. As he set down the rice buckets, he whispered to Sarah in Japanese. Lieutenant Yamamoto says to be ready. The fire starts at 2200. She will create additional distractions at the north fence. Move south. Fast. The women ate their rice slowly, savoring it. It might be the last meal some of them had for days. At 2145, Akiko walked calmly to the supply depot. The guard there knew her, nodded respectfully, despite her confinement status. Just checking inventory, Private. Colonel Ishida wants a full accounting. The guard let her pass. She moved through the depot, ostensibly counting crates, actually placing small piles of oily rags near ammunition stores, near fuel drums, near anything that would burn hot and fast. At 2200 exactly, she lit the first pile. Then she walked out, nodded to the guard, and headed toward her quarters as if nothing had happened. Behind her, the fire found the fuel drums. The explosion lit up the night sky like a second sun. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards poured out of barracks running toward the flames. Officers shouted conflicting orders. Someone rang the alarm bell, a frantic clanging that echoed off the mountain walls. In the confusion, nobody noticed 45 women slipping out of their barracks and moving toward the south fence. Nobody except Ishida. He stood on the steps of the command building, watching the fire with cold eyes, watching the guards rush to contain it, watching the shadows at the south fence where movement should not be. "Prisoners escaping," he said calmly to his aide. "Sound the alert. All guards to the south perimeter. Shoot on sight." The aide ran to comply, but before he could raise the alarm, a shot cracked through the darkness. The aide fell clutching at his shoulder. Private Tanaka stood 10 feet away, his rifle smoking. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the weapon. "I am sorry, sir," he said to Ishida. "I cannot let you stop them." Ishida drew his sidearm with mechanical precision, shot Tanaka twice in the chest. The young private fell without a sound, his rifle clattering on the stones. Then Ishida raised his pistol toward the fleeing prisoners and took aim at the nearest target. Helen Morrison, struggling to run on legs weakened by torture, fell behind the others. She was the easiest shot. Ishida's finger tightened on the trigger. A body slammed into him from the side, spoiling his aim. The shot went wide, sparking off stones. Ishida hit the ground hard, his pistol skittering away in the darkness. Akiko straddled him, her hands around his throat. "Run," she screamed toward the prisoners. "I will hold him. Run!" Helen hesitated for only a second, looked back at Akiko wrestling with Ishida, looked at Private Tanaka's body cooling on the stones, looked at her nurses disappearing into the jungle darkness, made the hardest choice a commander can make. She ran. Behind her, Akiko and Ishida fought in the firelight. Two officers of the Imperial Japanese Army wrestling in the mud like animals. Ishida was stronger, trained in hand-to-hand combat, but Akiko was fighting for something bigger than herself, fighting for redemption, fighting for grace. She could not win. She knew this, but she could buy time. Ishida got his hands free, struck her across the face with stunning force, reached for his backup pistol. Akiko grabbed his wrist, bit down hard, tasted blood. He screamed, pulled away. The pistol fell between them. They both lunged for it. Akiko's hand closed on the grip first. She rolled away, aimed, fired. The shot echoed through the mountains louder than the fire, louder than the alarm bells. Colonel Ishida fell backward, a red flower blooming on his chest. He stared at her with disbelief, then nothing. Akiko dropped the pistol. Her hands were shaking. She had just killed a superior officer, had committed the ultimate betrayal of the code she had lived by for 30 years. But 45 American women were running toward freedom, and that she realized was worth dying for. She heard boots approaching. Helen looked at Akiko, because we showed her something she had never seen before. We showed her that grace is real, that mercy is not weakness, that human beings can change even in the darkest circumstances. And she chose to become someone different, someone better, someone worthy of the mercy we showed her. One by one, the 45 women testified. Sarah Chen described the medicine incident, how Akiko let her go. Dorothy Williams sang Amazing Grace in the courtroom, her voice filling the chamber with the same hymn they had sung in prison. Sergeant O'Brien described the baseball game, the moment when Akiko picked up the ball and smiled. Each woman told the same truth. Akiko had participated in their captivity, had been cruel, had caused suffering, but she had also changed, had shown mercy, had ultimately saved them all. The prosecutor fought hard, brought up Akiko's signed orders, her interrogation reports, the two women who had died under her watch. "She is a war criminal," he insisted. "The evidence is overwhelming." "The evidence is complicated," the chief judge corrected. "This tribunal was established to punish evil and uphold justice. But we were also told to consider mitigating circumstances, to recognize that war creates impossible choices, to acknowledge that human beings are capable of both terrible cruelty and extraordinary courage, sometimes within the same person." He looked at Akiko. "Lieutenant Yamamoto, you have heard the testimony. Do you have anything to say before we render our verdict?" Akiko stood. Her voice was steady. "I participated in evil. I hurt these women. I violated their dignity. I deserve punishment. But I want this tribunal to understand something. These American women did not just survive Camp Okatsu. They conquered it, not with violence, not with hatred, with something more powerful than anything the Empire ever taught me." She paused. "They showed me that the values America claims to believe in are not propaganda. Freedom, equality, human dignity. These are real, and they are worth dying for. I killed Colonel Ishida not to save myself, but to save them because they taught me that some things matter more than obedience to authority. Some things matter more than survival itself. She looked at Helen. They taught me grace, and grace demands that I tell the truth even if that truth condemns me. So I asked this tribunal for nothing. I expect nothing. I simply wanted the world to know what these women did, how they won a war without firing a shot, how they turned their enemy into their savior. The tribunal recessed for 4 hours. When they returned, the chief judge's face was grave. Lieutenant Akiko Yamamoto, this tribunal finds you guilty of war crimes related to the imprisonment and mistreatment of American military personnel. However, we also recognize extraordinary mitigating circumstances. Your actions in facilitating the escape of 45 prisoners at great personal risk demonstrate a capacity for moral courage rarely seen in these proceedings. He paused. This tribunal sentences you to 10 years imprisonment. Time already served will be credited. You will be eligible for parole in 5 years pending good behavior. The courtroom erupted again. The prosecutor shouted that it was too lenient. Some in the gallery called for harsher punishment, but Helen Morrison was crying. Not tears of anger, tears of relief, because justice had been tempered with mercy, because grace had won. Akiko was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. As she passed Helen's row, she stopped. The guards allowed it. Thank you, Akiko said quietly, for coming, for testifying, for keeping your promise. What promise? Helen asked. That you would tell my story, that you would make sure the world knew. Helen smiled through her tears. Some promises are too important to break. They stood there for a moment, two women who should have been enemies, connected by something deeper than nationality or ideology, connected by the transformative power of grace. I will write to you, Helen said, if they allow it. I would like that very much. Then Akiko was led away, and Helen was left standing in the courtroom with her 44 sisters watching the woman who had tortured them and saved them disappear through a doorway into an uncertain future. Helen Morrison returned to the United States in February 1946. She was decorated for her service, given a medical discharge due to injuries sustained in captivity, offered a quiet life in Iowa on the farm where she had grown up. But she could not be quiet, could not let the story die. She became a VA nurse working with veterans who came home broken from war. She advocated for better treatment of POWs. She pushed for changes to the Geneva Convention that would explicitly protect female military personnel. She wrote letters to senators and congressmen and anyone who would listen. And every month without fail, she wrote to Akiko Yamamoto in Sugamo Prison, Tokyo. The letters were simple at first. Updates on the other women, news from America, descriptions of Iowa in different seasons, nothing political, nothing that would cause problems with the censors. But over time, the letters became something more. A conversation between two women who had seen the worst of humanity and still believed in the possibility of redemption. Akiko was released on parole in 1950 after serving 5 years. She moved to a small apartment in Tokyo, took a job teaching English at a girls' school, and lived quietly. She never married, never sought publicity, never tried to profit from her story. But she kept every letter Helen sent. 56 years of correspondence, a paper trail of grace. They never saw each other again during those decades. Travel between America and Japan was complicated. Visas were difficult, money was tight, and there was always the question of whether the world was ready for the story of a Japanese war criminal and the American woman who forgave her. But they wrote, month after month, year after year, two women growing old together across an ocean, connected by words on paper and a shared understanding of what grace truly meant. Helen never married either. She told herself it was because she was too busy with her work, too focused on advocacy. But the truth was simpler. She had given her heart to something bigger than romance. She had given it to the belief that human beings could change, that enemies could become friends, that mercy could conquer hate. In 1998, Helen Morrison died of heart failure at age 84. She left behind boxes of letters, journals, and documents, all carefully labeled and stored in her attic. In 2000, Akiko Yamamoto died peacefully in her sleep at age 85. She left behind the same collection of letters, along with her forbidden wartime journal, and a battered baseball that sat on her desk for 57 years. And that might have been the end of the story except for one thing. In late 2001, a researcher named Dr. Jennifer Chen was going through newly declassified documents from the Pacific War. She was looking for information about her grandmother, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, who had died the year before. What she found instead was a file marked Camp Okatsu Female POW Facility, Philippines, 1942 to 1943, classified top secret, do not release until 2045. But it was 2001, and someone had made a mistake. The file had been declassified 50 years early. Inside were interrogation transcripts, medical reports, lists of prisoners. Akiko's testimony from the 1945 trial, Helen's letters advocating for recognition of what happened, Sarah's intelligence reports, everything. Dr. Chen began making phone calls. Within weeks, she had connected with the families of all 45 surviving women, had gathered their stories, had uncovered a truth that two governments had tried to bury for 56 years. In December 2000, shouting, but she did not run. She knelt beside Tanaka's body, closed his eyes gently, and waited for what came next. When the guards arrived and found Ishida dead, they beat her unconscious, dragged her to the command building, called Tokyo for instructions. The order came back quickly. Transport her to Tokyo. She would stand trial for murder, treason, and collaboration with the enemy. Akiko smiled through broken teeth. At least she would live long enough to know if the women made it to safety. At least she would have a chance to tell the truth. Sarah heard the gunshot, knew what it meant, kept running. Helen heard it, stumbled, nearly fell. Dorothy caught her, kept her moving. She gave us this chance, Dorothy said through tears. We honor her by taking it. So they ran, through jungle that tore at their skin, through darkness so complete they could only follow Sarah's voice calling directions, through pain and exhaustion and the terror of pursuit. They ran until the fire behind them was just a glow on the horizon, until the alarm bells faded to nothing, until the only sounds were their own ragged breathing and the endless symphony of the jungle night. Then finally Sarah called a halt. 45 women collapsed in a small clearing, some crying, some too exhausted for tears. All of them free for the first time in 16 months. Helen did a head count. Once, twice, 3 times to be sure. 45. Everyone accounted for. Everyone alive. She thought of the 2 who had died to make this possible. Private Tanaka, barely 18, who chose mercy over orders, and Akiko Yamamoto, who had tortured them and then saved them. We need to keep moving, Sarah said. Ishida is dead, but they will send patrols at first light. We need to find the Filipino resistance before then. Helen nodded, pushed herself to her feet despite the agony. 5-minute rest, then we move. Sarah, you have point. Dorothy, rear guard. Everyone else stay together. We do not leave anyone behind, understood? Yes, ma'am. They moved through the jungle like ghosts following Sarah's navigation. Dawn found them 15 miles from camp, hidden in a cave system Sarah had learned about from overheard guard conversations. And there waiting for them with weapons and water and Filipino smiles were resistance fighters who had gotten word from Akiko days earlier that Americans might be coming this way. You are safe now, the resistance leader said in accented English. We take you to coast. American submarine picks you up. You go home. Home. The word felt foreign after so long. But Helen nodded, accepted water, distributed it to her nurses, made sure everyone drank before she took a sip herself. Only then did she let herself cry for Akiko Yamamoto, for the enemy who had become a friend, for the woman who had found grace in the last possible moment and paid for it with everything. She saved us, Helen whispered. She saved us all. The submarine USS Nautilus surfaced 3 miles off the coast of Luzon on a moonless night in September 1943. 45 American women waded through surf to reach it, helped aboard by sailors who stared at them in shock. Jesus Christ, the captain muttered. Command said you were POWs, but I did not expect. Get medical up here now. They were taken to Australia, debriefed, examined, given clean uniforms and real food and beds with actual mattresses, told that their stories would be classified, that what happened at Camp Okatsu was too sensitive for public knowledge, that they should sign agreements never to speak of it. Helen signed. They all signed. What choice did they have? But Helen kept her own record, wrote down everything in a journal she hid in her footlocker, wrote down Akiko's name, Private Tanaka's sacrifice, the baseball game in the mud, the singing of Amazing Grace, all of it, because someone needed to remember. Someone needed to tell the truth. The war continued. MacArthur returned to the Philippines. Manila was liberated. Camp Okatsu was found burned to the ground, then all evidence destroyed. Official Japanese records showed no facility had ever existed at that location. But Helen remembered, and she spent the next 2 years of war and 56 years of peace trying to find out what happened to Akiko Yamamoto, trying to learn if she had survived, trying to ensure that the woman who saved them all would not be forgotten. It would take the fall of empires and the opening of sealed archives for her to finally learn the truth. That truth was waiting for her in a courtroom in Tokyo in December 1945, where this story began. The tribunal chamber was silent after Akiko finished speaking. She had talked for 3 hours telling everything. The baseball, the medicine, the singing, Helen's words about grace, the moment she chose 45 American lives over her own certainty. The prosecutor stood slowly. Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to manipulate the tribunal's sympathy. Lieutenant Yamamoto participated in systematic abuse. She deserves the maximum penalty. The chief judge looked at Akiko for a long moment. Then he said something unexpected. Does the defense have any witnesses? The defense attorney, a young Japanese lawyer appointed by the tribunal, stood nervously. Your Honor, we have been unable to locate any witnesses who can corroborate Lieutenant Yamamoto's account. The prisoners in question were classified by American military intelligence. We do not know their current whereabouts or even their mom. I see. The judge picked up his gavel. In that case, the rear door of the tribunal chamber opened. A woman walked in, thin, older than her 32 years, but walking with her back straight and her head high. She wore an American Army uniform with captain's bars on her shoulders. Behind her came 44 more women, all in uniform, all walking with that same military bearing. The tribunal erupted. Prosecutors shouted objections. Guards moved to block the women, but the chief judge slammed his gavel down. Order, who are you? The first woman saluted sharply. Captain Helen Morrison, United States Army Nurse Corps serial number N744882. I am here to testify on behalf of Lieutenant Akiko Yamamoto. Akiko's head snapped up. She stared at Helen across the courtroom. Their eyes met for the first time in 2 years. Helen smiled, that same smile. The one that said, even here, even now, grace was possible. The prosecutor was on his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. These witnesses were not disclosed. Because we were classified, Helen said calmly. Our own government tried to bury our story. They told us never to speak of Camp Okatsu, never to mention what happened there. They wanted the whole thing to disappear. She walked to the witness stand. But some things are too important to stay buried. Some truths demand to be told. Lieutenant Yamamoto saved our lives. She risked everything to help us escape. She killed her own commanding officer to protect us. And then she spent 2 years in a Japanese prison, beaten and starved, refusing to recant her testimony about what happened at that camp. The chief judge leaned forward. You are saying she helped you escape after months of holding. In December 2001, on the anniversary of the 1945 tribunal, a ceremony was held in Washington, D.C. No government officials attended. No press was invited. Just the families of the 45 women and 2 elderly Japanese visitors. One was Akiko's niece, carrying the baseball and the letters. The other was Private Tanaka's younger sister, now 78 years old, who had spent her entire life wondering what happened to her brother. A plaque was unveiled at Arlington National Cemetery. It read, in memory of 47 American military women imprisoned at Camp Okatsu, Philippines, May 1942 to September 1943. 2 died in captivity, 45 survived through courage and grace in memory of Lieutenant Akiko Yamamoto, Imperial Japanese Army, who chose redemption over ideology and sacrificed everything to save her enemies in memory of Private Ichiro Tanaka, Imperial Japanese Army, age 18, who died so that mercy could triumph over hate. They could take our uniforms, but not our oath. Captain Helen Morrison, USA, some grace is so powerful it conquers even death. Her chin stood before the plaque, holding her grandmother's letters. She had never known this story, never known what Sarah had endured, never understood why her grandmother kept a battered baseball on her desk and why she cried every time someone played Amazing Grace. Now she knew. She looked at the families gathered there, children and grandchildren of nurses and soldiers, and a Japanese woman who had chosen to become something better than what she was. They wanted this story buried, Dr. Chen said quietly. Both governments, Japan because it was shameful, America because it was complicated, because it did not fit the narrative of clear heroes and villains, because it suggested that grace might be more powerful than violence, that mercy might be stronger than revenge. She touched the plaque gently. But some truths refuse to stay buried. Some stories demand to be told. This is one of them. That night, Dr. Chen began writing a book. She interviewed the children of the 45 women. She tracked down declassified documents from Japan. She found Akiko's journal donated by her niece to the National Archives. She pieced together the full story. The baseball, the medicine, the singing, the transformation of a woman who believed in nothing but ideology into someone who believed in the possibility of human goodness. The book was published in 2003. It became a bestseller. It sparked conversations about war crimes and forgiveness, about justice and mercy, about whether human beings can truly change or if we are forever defined by our worst moments. But for Dr. Chen, the most important thing was simpler. Her grandmother's story was told. Helen's promise was kept. And the world finally knew what happened when 47 American women went to war, not with weapons, but with grace. Today, there are two stones in Arlington National Cemetery side by side in a section reserved for special circumstances. One reads Captain Helen Morrison, United States Army, Nurse Corps, 1913 to 1998. She showed the world what grace looks like. The other reads Lieutenant Akiko Yamamoto, Imperial Japanese Army, 1915 to 2000. She learned that mercy is stronger than hate. Between them, embedded in the ground, is a baseball. Bronze, permanent, inscribed with the words, "Some weapons conquer through violence. Some conquer through grace." This was grace. Every year on September 15th, the anniversary of the escaped people, gather at those stones. Veterans, families, students, people who have heard the story and been changed by it. They place flowers. They sing Amazing Grace. They remember, because some stories are too important to forget. Some grace is too powerful to be buried by governments or time or the desire for simple narratives. And some truths once spoken echo through generations. This is one of those truths. This is the story of how mercy conquered hate, one human heart at a time.